I just want to kind of tell you where I'm at, where I came from, and where I want to go. My dad is here with me today. He was not really into Ноу Тил until yesterday. I've been working on it for 4 years, and Ноу Тил doesn't work. Well, it does work, but I think Ноу Тил will not work in our area if you don't do cover crops. A lot of our soil is our calcium levels are 8,000 to 12,000 parts per million. I mean, we're farming lime. I mean, our soil could be used as a liming agent. That's just the way it is. If you don't have a growing root in there, that soil is going to be concrete. I mean, that's just how it is here. We have so much lime. Our CECs are mid-40s to mid-50s. I mean, our soil is so rare in this area that you send your soil tests into the labs and they just don't know what to do with them. They just don't work. So I want to give you a little bit of a background, and there's 3 main points that changed the way I'm farming now. My father worked at IBM up until the mid-90s, and then through a lot of stuff, they wanted to relocate him and all this. I have 2 brothers, 1 brother and 1 sister, both younger. So around 95 or 96, he basically didn't get laid off, didn't get fired, but it was either move away or just quit. So he did what every logical person would do: quit and start farming at 42 years old with a mortgage, a stay-at-home mother, and 200 acres. I would have never been able to do that, but that's what we did. Currently now, we have, of course, our farm has grown. I farm with my wife. She helps. I've got 2 kids. And for anyone that has children, that was if I could say there was one thing that really changed my thinking, it was when my oldest son was born, Luke. He's 6 now. Because you're so nervous, and you know that if you and your wife, or if you're single, if you go hungry, well, you can go to a buddy's house, and if you hang out there long enough, he's going to feed you. You can go to your parents' freezer, and you can go steal you a pound of ground meat, and you're going to make it. But when you got that mouth to feed, you have that one little infant that you don't want to go hungry. It changes your perspective on life. And that was in 2010. We had a really wet winter in 2010. We couldn't get any fertilizer out. We were farming about 1,700 or 1,800 acres, if I remember at the time, just my father and I. And we were heavy tillage. I mean, and the bad thing is, we're still a young farmer. We're the youngest farmer that I know. I mean, there's nobody in our area farming that started at 42, and now I'm technically a second-generational farmer, but my dad wasn't even farming when I was 16 years old. So everything we've done was from ground zero. So in 2010, we were farming 1,700 acres or so with 160 horsepower case tractor. We just got a big tractor. We got a 4850. We paid $22,000 for that. And we thought that was the best tractor in the world. If that's all we ever had, we'll be happy for the rest of our farming careers. We were running a 16-foot disc and a 24-foot field cultivator and probably like a 15-shank chisel plow, over 1,700 acres of land. We worked night and day, but we did it. We had a wet year that 2010, and we were changing the water pump on that 4850 when we were trying to spray and side dress because it was so wet. Some of those fields, we only plowed 1 time, and we couldn't get in. So we thought we were going to just farm an insurance crop, plant some corn into this land that's grown up in volunteer. It's only been plowed 1 time. Come in, put in 60 units of nitrogen, no phosphate, and collect insurance. That was the plan. We're working on this water pump in April, and it was cold for some reason. It's usually not that cold in April. And we were cold, and my dad said, "You know what, Chris? You're not fixing this water pump for yourself anymore. You're fixing this water pump for Luke." And I remember that. And that was the spark that got me started. By the way, we averaged 85 bushels of corn across the board that year. on 60 units of nitrogen. In a conventional tillage situation, that's impossible, right? We thought it was because we talked yesterday. Everyone's putting 1 to 1.2 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of corn. Well, you don't have to do that. I still don't know where we need to be, but we don't have to be at 1 and 1.2. I know that. They were talking about after following Dr. Williams yesterday, we're all going to have to go to confession or something, and because all these bad things we've been doing. And I was laying in bed last night, and we don't discuss how many acres we farm publicly, but just on our farm that my dad and I make our living on, and it's not a very good living the last couple of years. We're struggling. It's this $4 break-even price for corn, that's real. And we're getting $3.40 right now at the elevator. I mean, that does not work, and that's been 2 years in a row. It doesn't work, and that's on average yields. We've had excessive rain, and our yields have been cut in half. I mean, we're on an equity burn right now that we have never experienced. I mean, it's bad. It's really bad. So I was laying in bed last night thinking about the roundup and needing to go to confession. So all y'all are going to be hearing all my sins today. And the thing of it is, though, is we notice that we're all committing these soil health sins. We got to get over that. My dad and I, we don't even have hired help. We're still farming everything virtually ourselves. We hire a little bit of help for harvest and this and that. We're going through 1,400 to 1,500 gallons of Roundup every year. I mean, do you realize how much Roundup we're using? That's just Roundup. That ain't talking our dicamba, our LV6s, our adjuvants that go with it, all that stuff. We're using too much. But that's number one. That's when I first thought about no-till. And then I've been reading on the internet and reading some stuff, and then, well, let me backtrack just a little bit. Like I said, I'm losing my train of my thoughts sometimes. But after I graduated college, just a real quick nutshell, I would do some work for the dairies over in the Dublin, Stephenville area. Up north of here, about 60, 70 miles, is a town called Hillsborough in Hill County. I do a summer job up there, which I do a lot of book work and stuff throughout the year for them, but 3 weeks to a month out of the year, I manage a silage harvest up there. And we're feeding roughly 30,000 dairy cows every year. So it's my job to meet with all the farmers, get the silage purchased, and hire all of our custom operators to come in and get the harvest done. We usually do in between 12 to 18,000 acres a year, and we usually put up around 200 to 250,000 tons of silage in 5 different silage pits located in the county. And we do it in 14 days. So in a roundabout way, I have personally been in charge of chopping silage when I add up, I've been doing it 12 years. We do 12, 14, 15,000 acres a year. Well, we're getting it, I've personally removed 180 to 200,000 acres of corn for this job. And I got some farmers up here, guys. We've been chopping the same fields. They started in 2000. I started in 2004. We've got farmers that have chopped the same exact field since 2000 with conventional tillage. I mean, you're chopping the corn off. There's nothing to plow. We used to always call it trash. You got to plow to get rid of the trash. Well, there's no residue. There's no trash. And they're still plowing. And we're still chopping silage. I mean, so you got a guy like me that's thinking we're doing this wrong, but how can I continue to do that job? Well, I need a job that's a good job. But I'm learning with these farmers. I'm working with them. I'm saying, hey, let's rotate these fields. Plant wheat after this. And I've got some of them actually planting no-till wheat into their silage stalks now. And I'm like, don't give me every acre every year. I want 30% of your acres every year. And you know what? Ever since I've been doing that, our acres have been increasing every year. I mean, whenever I'm a silage buyer and I go to these farmers and like, I need as much silage as possible. And then I tell him, but I only want 30% of your acres. He's like, you don't want it all? No. It's a mistake. If you sell it all to me, you're making a mistake, and I don't want you to do that. So that's the other thing. In 2013 and 2014, I went to it's not really a conference, it was more of an education program called TPAP. It's the Executive Program for Agriculture Producers. It's hosted by Texas A&M down here in Austin. I was the only person from Texas there. It's people from all over the world, mainly the Midwest, but we had some New Zealanders, Australianers, a guy from England. You know, it's not your typical farmer meeting. We had 2 weeks of sessions over a 2-year course, and we never talked about a tractor, we never talked about corn, we never talked about a cow. All we talked about was management. And there's 200 people in this class, and they asked everyone that's a producer to stand up, and there was about 150 of us. And we were learning about managerial accounting. And the speaker, he's a great speaker, Dr. Whitman. He farms up in Idaho, I think it is, 14,000 acres, all no-till. He said the single best decision he made for profitability was no-till. He said, no, we're not here to talk about no-till. We're not here to talk about farming. I just want to know. So there's 150 of us standing up. He said, okay, now how many people are conventional till or strip till? There was about 5 of us standing. 145 people sat down because they've already been no-till. And these are the best producers in the country. How many people are still conventional tilling? I was the only one holding my hand up. That's my number 2 reason. When I was there, I met several farmers, and since I don't keep in touch with them, I'm just going to call them by their first names. I can talk, I'll talk on a personal level afterwards if y'all are more interested. I met a guy in Colorado. I call myself a dryland farmer. We get 30-something inches of rain a year. He's a dryland farmer. He gets 14 or 15. Him and his 2 brothers, no hired help, farm 17,000 acres. They have 1 tractor, 1 air seeder, 1 planter, 1 sprayer, and 1 combine. That's efficiency. Now, they have a longer planting window than we do, but they run 24 hours a day when they have to plant, but 3 guys running 17,000 acres. That's how you do it. I met another guy, Albert Peterson. He's from Kentucky. His grandfather started no-tilling in the 60s. They provide non-GMO corn to the bourbon industry. I didn't think you could no-till without Roundup. They're raising non-GMO soybeans, non-GMO corn, no-till since the 60s. Over 15,000 acres in 6 counties. Now, granted, they got a lot of equipment, but their average field size is like 35 or 40 acres per field. And they're running 15,000 acres in 6 counties. So it's a totally different perspective than the friend that I met in Colorado. One thing, whenever I try not to stay on, I try to stay away from Google and all this stuff because you can never believe anything you read, right? So I met one other person that if I regret one thing in life, and what I learned at this seminar was to not pick up my phone and Google this person. Dr. Jill Clapperton was in my class. And I don't know if any of y'all have heard of her or seen her speak, but she is, in my opinion, one of the better people to listen to and understand the science behind all of this stuff. I didn't know who she was. And I met a gentleman named Josh Lloyd. He was in charge of no-till on the plains at the time. I never heard of no-till on the plains, but I just happened to talk to those 2 were together, and I said, y'all are in a no-till, right? I'm like, yeah. They were like, yeah. And I said, well, I don't know what to do, but I farm here in Texas, and I don't know any other way to put it, but my soils are dead. I don't have soil anymore. I have dirt. And I learned this in college, Soil is what you grow your crops in. Dirt is what's under your fingernails. I'm farming dirt. My dirt is dead. And we sat down, and she's like, this is something I would usually charge for. And we talked for 2 to 3 hours. We skipped our meeting. We sat down at like 8 o'clock in the evening, and we talked to like 10 or 10:30. And she showed me these graphs and all this stuff. And she's like, cover crops, no till. I'm like, it's too dry, no till don't work, nobody's doing it, this and that. Well, I went through the week, my brain's still turning with all this information. I get home, I get on YouTube, I type her in, I'm like, golly. I had this scientist. I spent a week there, and this scientist could have just helped me so much. But I didn't need that help. I just needed that one little push. So after all that came through, we have been experiencing what I call in Texas, we are living in a perpetual drought that's interrupted by brief times of flooding. Last year, we had over 60 inches of rain. Our average rainfall is about 32. We had like 61 or 62 inches of rain last year. But guess what happened in between June and September? We went 122 days with less than a half an inch. And when do we need our rain? June to September, when everything's growing. So we have to preserve this moisture, and that's what Dr. Clapperton was telling me in these cover crops. I really didn't believe it yet, because I was like, if you have it growing, it's going to take our moisture away. I want to preserve it, all this stuff. So with this flooding, we're conventional till. Probably 10 or 20% of our acres are flat with no terraces, but everything we farm is terraced, and we're Czech, so we always pick on the Germans because we got Germans and Czechs living within a couple miles from each other. And it's so weird. Czechs don't trust each other, and Germans don't trust each other. So Czechs farm land that Germans own, because the Germans don't trust the Germans, and the Czechs don't want the other Czechs getting, an advantage over them. So 90% of the land that we farm is German owners, and we're Czech. So we're always picking on each other, and the land that we farm is highly terraced, and it's just nothing's parallel. And so the joke is always that the Germans, because we're farming all this German land, the Germans went to the bar before they went to work to build the terraces, because they're just snakes everywhere. And it doesn't make sense. So when we till and we get these big rains that are coming 4 or 5 inches at a time, September 2010, that wet year I told you about whenever my son was born, we had 17 inches of rain in 6 hours. And we got 6 to 8 inches of loose dirt on all these terraces. I've never added it up, but I guarantee on our land, I bet you we have 400 terraces or more to maintain. How can two people trying to make a living that can't afford to hire help? Because, granted, we used to try and make $100 an acre. Right now, we're just trying to break even. You can't afford dirt work. You can't afford all that. So we were rebuilding terraces that after, it would have been the summer of 2011 when the drought hit. We were rebuilding all these terraces that got damaged in 2010 from that big rain. We're scraping terraces up. My dad's always running the scraper. He's scraping. And we'll always scrape the valley, haul it to the top, scrape it out, clean out the ditch where it runs. We're scraping, and that scraper's just bouncing. I'm watching them, dust is flying. We're scraping rock, solid rock. We got shallow limestone where we farm. When you drive the road to my house, and we farm the field on the south side of the road, neighbors got the one on the north side. There's pavement. We got paved road that's elevated 18 inches or so. There's 6 inches of topsoil. When I'm driving to my house, I look out my window, I see solid rock. We are not farming topsoil. It's all gone. So I look at this field across the road, we're building terraces and cleaning out waterways, and it just doesn't make sense. And that got me back to thinking with my son, how I don't want to say I don't want them to be farmers, but I'm definitely not going to force this, because this is the kind of life that if you don't love it or have a passion for it, you don't need to be in it. And so I don't ever, even at 4 and 6 years old, I don't push them and say, hey, y'all need a farm. They're going to do what they're going to do. But it's my job to try and provide those boys soil to farm, not the dirt that I'm farming. And when we're scraping terraces up and we're scraping rock, limestone rock. What are they going to farm? Nothing. There's going to be rock there. You can't grow anything on rock. It just ain't going to happen. So that's kind of what got me started. And then I got to thinking about being close to Austin. We got a lot of hippies and stuff around, and that's fine. I mean, everyone to each their own. But I know this is the right thing to do, but I'm the first one to say, I'm not a hippie. I'm not trying to save the world. I'm just trying to make a living doing what I love, and that's profit per acre. I want to help the environment. It's better, I know. But I'm not here to try and save the world. I want to make money. I want to let my wife stay at home to raise my kids. I want to make a profit, and that's what we're here for. I'm going to talk about Mr. Milton. I would never call him Milton to his face because he's an elder, and he's kind of my mentor, and he doesn't even know it. He's told me back when I started farming in 2004, and 5 and 6 when I started, he told me 3 things that he probably wouldn't even realize he told me, but they've stuck with me. He said, he knew he was not going to be the biggest farmer in the county, nor did he want to be. So I got to find out how to make 2 acres of profit off of 1. And he did it, using conventional tillage, by the way, but he did it. And he did it by putting his money in the ground. Your land, your fields, they don't care what's driving over the top of it. And what's the number one reason I wanted to become a farmer? I like tractors. I like driving combines. I like plowing. I like doing all that. Now, every time I turn the key on the tractor, I lose sleep at night. Because I know that engine's going to cost me $20,000 to rebuild it if it goes out. We were talking on the way home. My dad and I, we farm together. We plant and harvest together. We do some things separate. He runs a separate entity than myself. So I pick whatever I want to plant on my farms. I put out whatever chemicals, fertilizer, and he does his, but we yet do it together. My diesel bill since harvest, and I farm about 40% what he farms. We're not even. I farm a little bit less. My diesel bill is $900 to $1,300 a month. He's spending $2,500 a month on diesel. We have 2 main tillage tractors. We're putting over 500 to 600 hours a year on our tillage tractors. So now that I know all this stuff, how in the world I'm sitting here in this tractor losing money on my farm this year for 2 years in a row, which I've never lost money on my farm in my life except for the last 2 years, and it's 2 in a row. And in Texas, it was because of too much moisture, not drought. Go figure. But I'm sitting here plowing, and I know I don't have to be doing this. I am losing money. Every minute that tractor is running, I'm losing money. And I got to figure out a way not to do it. The other thing Mr. Milton told me is farm like it's going to rain tomorrow. That's where I've made my mistakes in Nou Till. I bought some cover crop seed this past summer to put in behind my wheat, and guess what? It was dry. We were in that 122 days of a drought, and I didn't put it in the ground. It's still sitting in the barn. It started raining in September. If I'd have planted it like I was supposed to, it would have grown. I ended up making it work on that farm with some volunteer wheat, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But the key is, remember what Mr. Milton says. You got to farm like it's going to rain tomorrow. We don't want to set ourselves up for a disaster, which goes back to my 2010 story. We farmed for an insurance check that year. We put 60 units of nitrogen out, and we tried to collect insurance, and we made 85 bushels of corn. If we'd have farmed for a crop, we'd have made over 100. That's what I'm saying. We've got to farm like it's going to rain tomorrow. One more thing on Mr. Milton, and I'll leave him alone. I had this 5-way mix on my first cover crop field, and let me see what I had planted here. It was a hay grazer, a brown top millet, sun hemp, iron clay cowpeas, and a soybean, non-GMO soybean mix. We planted that. Actually, my dad did it for me because I had to go on my silage job, and we had old 4440, and I had to rent the county drill, and since I knew my dad was going to plant it, I rented the 10-foot drill instead of going extra 10 miles to get the 15-foot drill. So, it wasn't that problem for me. So it was June, And my poor dad, I don't know why the dadgum AC went out on that 4440 while he was planting. So here he is with this 10-foot drill, planting this cover crop for me that he knows is not going to work. I know probably is not going to work, but I just spent $1,800 on it, and I'm paying $500 to rent this drill, and I'm out of town in a hotel in air conditioning. So things are good, right? We caught like a half an inch, I think, when I was up there. I came home in July. I usually get home around the 10th of July. That stuff actually came up. By August, the hay grazer was a foot tall, and everything else was turning yellow, and it was wilted, and I'm like, see, I knew I was right. This no-till don't work. Well, it started raining. The 1st of August, it started to rain. By the time I harvested corn, I'm going to talk about 2 different farms. This happens to be what I call the Geist Farm. It's like 250-something acres in there. On the west side, it's about 150 pasture. East side is 2 fields that basically were abandoned in about 2006 and 07. It's land that was abandoned because there's so many rocks. It's literally impossible to till. I mean, it's land that should have been given back to the Indians 100 years ago. I mean, it's not worth farming. It's horrible. But I was young and naive, and I needed acres. Well, I've ended up turning that place into a continuous piece of land now that all was given up, and I've got 450 acres all in this one area now that nobody wanted. I took something that nobody wanted and turned it into something that people want. That's what I do with my cattle, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. We did that. He planted that for me. Come into late August, there's 2 fields on the east side of that farm, and I did the 60 acres on the north side. I'm shelling corn on the south side, and that was in 2014, because I planted wheat in yes. The cover crop was planted in June of 2013. This is August of 2013. I'm shelling corn. It was 105 degrees that day. I remember it like it was yesterday, because my number 1 thing with my son being born, number 2 thing, the TPAP experience. Those are important, but they're the bottom of the list. This is the number 3 thing that made me go no-till. This is it, and it's the top of the list. I was shelling that corn. We made a phenomenal corn crop that year. I mean, we're talking Midwest type yields. I mean, 100 for our area. I mean, we had some farms going 150, 160 bushels, which never happens. I'm shelling corn. Of course, we're waiting on trucks. I'm waiting on trucks. So I'm like, what the heck? By this time, this cover crop's 4 to 5 feet tall of that blend. Like, I'm going to just go look at it, since it's the first one I've ever done. 105 degrees. I get out of the combine in that cornfield. There's 1-inch cracks in the ground. I start walking. I go across the waterway. I walk into that field, and all of a sudden, I'm like, what is going on? I started looking around, took a couple pictures, then I looked down at the soil now. It's not dirt anymore. This is the first cover crop. It's not dirt. I look down. It's wet. 105 degrees outside. There's 1-inch cracks in my cornfield where I'm shelling corn. I walk out of there. I look at my boot. I've got mud on my boot in August in Central Texas with 5 foot of stuff growing. It's impossible, right? That is the number 1 thing. Once I saw that, it's been my mission and my passion to make this happen. And it goes back from TPAP and stuff like this, because I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anybody was no-tilling. Josh Lloyd from No Till on the Plains, he's like, well, there's someone down in your area that's no-tilling. I'm like, well, I don't know him. I live there. I don't know him. That's how I got to meet Jonathan Cobb. Networking is key in this deal. Josh told me about Jonathan. Jonathan told me about a neighbor I have that's 20-something miles away. He's in another county over. His name's Randall Unosh. I go to church with the man. I didn't even know he was a farmer. He's been no-tilling for 20 years east of me. I didn't even know the man was a farmer. I knew who he was, but I didn't know. If I wouldn't have gone to TPAP, met Josh, met Dr. Clapperton, got in contact with these guys here, met Jonathan, I wouldn't have known the guy that I go to church with is a Ноу Тил farmer for 20 years. I mean, that's what it's about. It's the networking. On that cover crop where I noticed the wet on the field and blew my mind, my brother and I were running some cattle together. And I'm not a cow guy. Everything I've read says, you need to integrate livestock. I'm not a cow guy. I don't like hay. I don't like working on water pipes when it's cold. I mean, I'm not a cow guy. Well, he was more into cow-calf, and I let him, he ran it, all cow-calf, but I'm like, man, I got all this feed out here. What do I do? I don't know, we had probably 25 cows or something on that, pairs on there with a couple bulls. After we harvested that corn, just for an experiment, I got a friend of mine that I met up around Hillsboro that he's teaching me how to upgrade cattle. This is the key. I went out and bought, and these are rough numbers. They're not perfect because this has been a while back and I don't keep good enough records. I bought 10 old bred cows, 7 and 8 months bred, skinny, ugly, no teeth. I think I paid around $800 to $900 a head for them because this was back when calves were bringing $1,100, $1,200. So, I mean, timing was on my side. I mean, it wasn't planned this way. It just worked out that way. Bought those 10 cows, turned them, mixed them with my cows, turned them out on this 100-acre side, and we let them have 30 acres of the 150-acre side so they can get to the water trough. I didn't see them cows for 2 months. They were in that forage. I didn't see them for 2 months. The cows that I bought that were bred, I didn't know if they calved. You couldn't find them. They were just in there living. But that's the way I want to raise cattle. It goes back to who's the employee, who's the employer. If you're out there feeding hay, people, every time you touch a bale of hay, you're losing money. You are losing money every time you touch a bale of hay. And we do corn and wheat, and we even do like 250 acres of grass hay, and it's all stacked up trying to give it away right now. I mean, hay is a losing proposition. I won't even think about cutting or harvesting any hay on any of the land I farm other than one little place. You got to have a little bit of a backup plan. I got 10 acres that I keep in hay. I rotate it with another 17-acre field. Just a little bitty piece that I sacrifice for hay. But on those cattle, we didn't feed any hay to them. When we went then, after we calved them out, our other pasture had recovered and had winter grass, and I did plant a little 10 acres of oats down in there. We moved them off of that side, put them on the west side. After the calves got to about, I'd say 4 weights or something like that, we shipped them, the cows and the calves. I roughly paid $9,000 or $10,000 for these 10 cows, right? Well, you know what they sold for? Prices were good, $18,000. So my first cover crop experience, I didn't have to plant it. It cost me $18 an acre or something to plant the seed. I rented a drill. I had a cattle buyer buy me some cattle and deliver them to me. All I did was put them out in the pasture, sold them for an $8,000 profit. Well, it ain't hard to figure out what 8,000 divided by 60 is. $147 an acre I added to that one field in pure profit. And I didn't do anything. Just let it happen. This past winter, when I should have planted that cover crop I told you all about, we had 34 pairs on this farm. I had planted corn on the north section of that field. Second year, no-till corn with a cover crop in between. This past year, I had wheat, and I was going to convert that field to no-till, so I was going to plant that same 5-way mix, put the same cows on there, and do it all over again, right? I'm a genius, $150 an acre. Well, it was wet. No, it was extremely dry, and I never got the seed planted because I was too scared. Then it started raining, and volunteer wheat came up, and like a good farmer, I didn't spray it like all my neighbors. Turned the cattle out anyways. My cover crop on the corn on corn was winter peas, common vetch, elbon, and radishes. It didn't come up very good, about like that, but it didn't matter. The cows, I had 34 pairs, 2 bulls on this 100 acres, and they didn't leave that 40 acres of volunteer wheat for 2 months. They lived on that 40 acres of volunteer wheat. I ended up feeding 20 bales of hay to that set of cattle because by January, that 40 acres was a feedlot, man. Every square foot or every 2 square feet had at least 4 or 5 hoof prints. It was solid as a rock. It was a feedlot. So I moved them off and had to put them on hay. It got dry again right before corn planting. I did end up terminating the wheat with Roundup. It got dry again. What am I going to do with all these hoof prints? My bright idea. Get the tractor, and we got this old John Deere 1010 field cultivator. I don't want to plow. I'm going to level it. So I set that field cultivator just so the sweeps are touching the ground, and so the hairs would level behind me. I started running at a diagonal. First pass 2 deep, solid as a rock, cleachy concrete. This high calcareous soil I was telling you about, it's like concrete, literally. It's white. It's even white. I mean, it's concrete. Made 1 round, went down, adjusted it shallower, came back, adjusted it shallower, went down, adjusted shallower, came back, went to adjusted shallower, and the frame's broken. I mean, it's that hard. So I'm like, I fold up and go home and forget it. I'm going to just plant it. I came back and sprayed. I planted Ноу Тил corn into it, came back and sprayed it. And I remembered where I did that. Where the cow tracks were that I did not try to level was pretty smooth. Where I ran that field cultivator 1/4 of an inch deep and didn't do anything but break my plow, it was still rough as the day I field cultivated it 2.5 months prior. I don't know how that works. That's unexplainable to me. But I witnessed it, and that's just the way it was. So what I found after that first cover crop experience and this 40-acre feedlot, I'm calling it, the land heals itself. It just absolutely heals itself. I can't believe it. I can't explain it. I don't understand it, but it works. And that's why I didn't do a slideshow today. I just wanted to talk because, one, technology and me don't get along, and I knew the thing would have broke, and I would have freaked out, and then I wouldn't have said 10 words. But I don't have any fancy graphs. I don't have any data. All I got is a few pictures on my phone, and who really wants to see more pictures of cover crops? We've been seeing that all day yesterday. What, you want to see a picture of a grain drill? I mean, what I use to plant it, none of that stuff matters. Because remember what Mr. Milton says. It doesn't matter what goes on top of the ground. It's what you're putting in the ground. So all that doesn't matter. So that's intentionally why I didn't even have a slideshow, because we just need to talk. Talking on the fields healing themselves. That first field that I talked about and that I put in the cover crop in 2013 had the good cover crop, grazed it. It was rough, had cow trails. Like I said, I couldn't find the cows. We ended up having to get 4-wheelers, and it took us 2 days to get these cows caught. I mean, you literally could not find them. Had cow trails, rough from the previous tillage pass when we planted. I planted it in the mud, all this. Planted the corn. I actually got Mr. Unosh to plant it for me because I wasn't brave enough to do it myself. He came and planted the corn for me because he's got his planter all rigged up. And I wanted to learn, so it was a good education. And he's like, man, that field's rough. I'm like, yeah, no joke. I come back to spray that field with Roundup. Let's see, that would have been in about May. So I pulled the cattle in November, and in May, that was the smoothest field I sprayed all year. I didn't even think the corn was going to come up, 1. I thought it was going to be rough as a cob. And 3, it was the smoothest field I sprayed all year. That got me thinking. That same field, let's see, that was 2014. Go 2015, did the crop of corn that I sprayed, and it was smooth. Come this year, we hit a wet pattern. And now I'm loving Ноу Тил, right? I want to take care of these fields. I don't want no ruts. It's nice and smooth, you know. I'm waiting, because it's wet, it's muddy. I don't want to rut up my field with my sprayer. Because, you know, the sprayers, you know, you got these little bitty 12-inch tires, and you got 800 gallons of chemical on the back, and these big booms and and engines. It's just heavy. I don't want to pack this ground, right? Don't want to cut ruts. Well, I finally get desperate because these dadgum sunflowers are that big, and, you know, I got a little bit of pride yet. I don't want this thing to go to weeds. So I fill up the sprayer, and I go. And I didn't want to. I make it around, and this thing still needed some terrace work because I didn't have the field prepared properly back in 2013 to start this process. But I was just so eager to start, I just did it anyways. And I was going around the tree line, over the terraces, and on these farms from being plowed so many years, when you go over a terrace doing your turn rows with a disc, your disc goes over the terrace. When it comes down, the front gangs gouge into the ground and throw a big old thing of dirt up, right where the water's supposed to flow out. So we've got this problem on all these farms, and all of our land is leased land primarily. So these big waterways are filled up with trees and all that. You can't get equipment in there to clean them terraces out properly for drainage. So I'm going over one of these terraces that exact same thing has happened. And as I go over that terrace, I start to pull back on my hydrostat, and I'm like, it's too late, because I see water standing, a pool of water there. And I'm going, then all of a sudden I pull back, and I'm like, wait, no, I need to keep going because I don't want to get stuck, right? Then that makes more damage to my field. So I punch it. Water starts flying. I'm like, wait, I just went right through it. So I made a mental note of that spot. I've never attempted to drive through standing water in my sprayer in my life, because in our soil, when it's plowed, there doesn't even have to be water there. If it just looks wet and you drive through it, buddy, you ain't moving. You're there. It's because there's no structure in that soil. You hit that plowed dirt that even looks a little bit wet, and you're sinking. You never even attempt to drive through standing water. So it's the first time in my life I ever went through standing water, didn't get stuck, made a mental note of it, went back after it dried up, and I didn't even put a cleat in my tire and make a mark. That soil structure in 3 years. It's impossible. It's not possible to do, but I did it. Another thing I want to talk about is I don't really consider myself a pioneer in our area because I'm a fairly humble person. I definitely don't think I'm better than anybody else. I don't think our farming operation is better than the neighbors, nothing like that. But I do want to try this stuff that's new to us, and I think it's the future. It was a weird story. I had recently bought another house from a retired farmer. It was his home place. He sold it to me. A gentleman that usually buys corn from another guy that I didn't know was looking for corn. He runs a couple hundred head of mama cows, and he just wanted some corn to supplement his cows over the winter. Well, anytime someone calls and wants deer corn or a pickup load of corn, it's just, we don't do it. We say, oh, it's too high. It's, $5 a bushel ain't going to happen. If we're going to do it, we're going to charge double, because it just slows down the operation and the flow. Well, this gentleman called my friend that's retired, looking for corn. He's no longer farming, so he gave him my number. And since it was the gentleman that sold me his home place, I'm like, it's apparently a friend of his. I'm going to go out of my way and give this guy some corn, right? He needed a couple hundred bushels out of the field. A few weeks went by. We got to the field that's close, and it happened to be that field that I ran that field cultivator in. First year corn, Ноу Тил, in what I'm calling, like Justin would say, that free cover crop, that volunteer wheat cover crop. I'm in that field, and that's where I meet him and load him. And plus, like they talked about growing some 85-day corn, I'm growing on my Ноу Тил 103-day corn, so that field was ready. That's why we went there, because he needed corn quick, and that's the first corn that was ready. It was a short season corn. So that's how we ended up on that field. And he just asked me, he's like, have you ever heard of anyone doing cover crops or no-tilling? And it totally blew me away, because No, I mean, nobody's ever done that. And I'm like, well, Mr. Charles, as a matter of fact, this field right here that we're in right now is Nou Til. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah, you see that one over there? I haven't plowed that one since 2013. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah. We got to talking, and I couldn't get rid of him. And we ended up having trucks in the field loaded, waiting to get loaded. We got a full grain cart, full combine. I'm the combine operator, and, we got people ready to haul grain, and this guy's still talking. I mean, it's like, whatever. Well, come to find out, he owns a lot of land. He is primarily pasture, but he had recently purchased a new farm that's basically 6 or 7 miles from where we were currently at. And it was a weird situation. My best friend and cousin was farming it. And he said, I really want someone to do a farm this farm like that. I didn't know this guy. I didn't know my cousin was farming it. But he didn't want it farmed conventionally. And luckily it was family and a friend, because I ended up talking to him. I'm like, look, this man came to me. He wants his farm done a different way. Do you mind all this? And he's like, no, go ahead. It was no hard feelings at all. So it was legitimately gained farm ground, but it's because of my practices. The only person in a 20-mile radius doing this, and it got me another farm. So people and landowners, they're starting to get it. And my goal is for me to get it and be a perfectionist and have it perfectly done to my standards when it's a well-known practice that everyone recognizes. So that's one deal right there that totally blew my mind, how what I'm doing speaks louder than my words. And it was the first time in my life that I've negotiated a lease agreement. Where we farm is cut up, a lot of development going on up down here in Georgetown. It's going to sound like a big number, but it's not as big as it sounds, so don't get me wrong. We farm a lot of 20-acre stuff, a little bit of 10-acre stuff. Our largest farm is probably around 180-something acres. That's cultivation. The one farm, the pasture farm I told you about, is a little bigger, but we have 42 landlords that we deal with. Like I said, it's not that we farm that much land. It's just it's cut up. I mean, I got one farm, it's 3 fields, but 4 farm numbers, 4 landlords. And it's one family farm, but it's been cut up 4 times with 3 fields. So it's not what it seems. But we deal with 42 people. And probably over the last 5 to 6 years, I've negotiated most of our lease agreements for our operation. And it's probably been roughly 15 to 17 new additions in the last 3 years. Never once have I went and I offered this man this cash lease agreement, and we went and met out at the farm. We're standing there on his on the hood of by the hood of his pickup talking, and I'm looking at this field, and it's like concrete. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to no-till wheat into here. I'm going to put a cover crop in here. Said, I don't know what I'm going to put in here. I might run some cattle for a year. He was putting up a fence. Hogs are real bad there. So I'm going to probably do wheat, then I'll probably put a grazing cover and run cattle for one whole year on this farm and go back to wheat. I mean, I really don't know what I'm going to do. I said, I don't have a plan, but I know I can come up with a plan. And I think our lease agreement was somewhere in the terms of $30-something an acre. I don't remember. But by the time I walked away, I leased that farm for $24 an acre. What? I offered him 30-something. But he said, Chris, I want you to do what you want to do here. You said cover crop seed usually costs you $20 an acre for a cheaper blend. I'm like, yes. He said, I want to split that cost with you. Never in my life have I negotiated a rent with a landlord and walked away and it's cheaper than what I offered. Ever. This stuff is real. People are paying attention. And I think it's the future. One more little thing, I was going to talk about our drought and all this stuff. And It's so crazy to me because we are constantly fighting mud at planting time. We'll have a field, everything perfectly plowed, level, ready to go. Well, you go in there and plant, your dang planter's choking up, grain drill's pushing, it don't work, right? Because of too much mud. So what do? Smart farmers, right? My dad gets on the field cultivator. That's his job. It's already plowed. There's no weeds out there, but we got to dry it out so we can get the planter through it. I'm serious. This happens every year, every farmer. Like idiots. We're out there with a field cultivator in a field with no weeds growing, drying it out so we can get our planter in the field. And then what do 2 months later when that corn or that wheat or that milo isn't growing? Damn, we need a rain. Why can't we get a rain? Well, we had it. We plowed it out. We got rid of our rain. It's that simple. But we can't get it because we're stuck in our old ways. I mean, we are stuck, and we have to get out of it. And this is the only way I see for us to get out of it. Plus, not to mention, the equipment savings. I did a little bit of math this morning. On our small farm, we have 40 tractor tires. I'm just talking about stuff with engines. I'm not talking about implements. 40 tractor tires, 56 truck tires, not counting pickups, 23 batteries, not counting pickups or farm vehicles. You realize how much them tractor tires are costing us? You realize we just had trouble with the grain truck that sat for 6 months. We had to go put 4 batteries in there. You know what that cost? It cost $750. And we got 23 or 24 of them just in farm equipment to maintain. You realize what that cost us? I did the math. We currently run like 5 tractors that I would consider like field tractors that we couldn't do without. I could easily cut 3 of them out. If we go 100% no-till, I won't cut them out because they're paid for and they're good insurance to have around. But realistically, I could get rid of those 3 tractors and we could go down to 2. And the only reason I would need 2 is because I need one on the grain cart and I need one on the grain drill chasing the combine. It's the only reason I need 2 tractors. I could do it with 1, but you got to have. One other thing I kind of want to talk about is a challenge. Real quick show of hands. Who here's your conventional row crop type farmer? Not too many? Well, then this challenge isn't going to work. I was going to say, for those of you that are not doing no-till and not doing cover crops, pick a field in the back where no one can see it and do it. My first no-till crop, it was a no-crop crop. I was planting, and there's this little 7-acre field that's been in grass forever. I'm like, man, I ought to try that no-till right there. So I sprayed it, then came back and had this beautiful carpet of ryegrass coming up. I'm like, oh, I want to be cool like all the people I see on the internet. I'm going to plant green, right? Well, it turned out it's Italian rye. Well, corn don't like Italian rye. I planted that corn, got a stand, sprayed it. Well, quit raining. Ryegrass sapped all my moisture, didn't want to die, opened up my seed trench. I made like 25 bushels of corn. It's a good thing I didn't do that one by the road, but I learned, and I didn't give up. The next year, planted corn back into that same field, didn't do anything to it. Planted corn back in that same field, and I have an 85-acre field right across the waterway from it. It made like 92 or 93 bushels to the acre. This first year failed corn crop, nothing. The second year corn crop put in the right way made within 2 bushels. I'm not seeing a yield loss here. I got another place, Peterson Place. It's 125 acres, 45 is cultivated. I'm just going to give you the lowdown on what I've done. 2014, 2-bale cotton, conventional. Almost unheard of in our area. Great crop. Came out, terminated, shredded the stalks, sprayed them with LV6 and let it lay. It got wet. I couldn't plow it. I got my neighbor from 25 miles away to come help me with this first no-till corn I was going to plant in 2014 that I already told y'all about. I said, man, that's only like 60 acres worth of work. He's got to drive 25 miles. I'm just going to give him this 45 acres to make it worth his trip. So we had this good cotton crop, shredded it, destroyed the stalks. Nothing grew all winter. It was amazing. I thought no-till we'd be spraying every month. Nothing came up. February, I sprayed it just because there was a few things out there, and Mr. Unosh planted it. I sprayed it one time that season in crop, and to be honest with you, it almost didn't need it. Every time we plow, we're bringing weed seeds to the top, and it's making these things germinate. My no-till fields are the cleanest fields we farm. If you don't disturb that soil, the weeds don't grow as much. We harvested that corn that summer, and that was that good corn year I told you about. So this dumb conventional farmer that thinks no-till doesn't work, all I did was spray it one time, pick up the phone, hire somebody to plant it. I made 115 bushels to the acre. And I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything except run a combine and cash a check. That's the way we do it. Then I came back this past year, put that four-way mix that I told you all about earlier, my corn-on-corn mix, came in, planted corn again. It made 68 or 70 bushels, but that's the same thing that everything else right across the fence, our conventional till did. But the point is, I didn't lose any bushels. The only thing I gained was productivity and less input costs. After that year, I went ahead and came in and sprayed it with Roundup, LV6, and I think it was clethodim. The label is called Volunteer, but I think clethodim was the active ingredient. Kills your volunteer corn. And this is my first year to do no-till wheat. I came in, no-tilled wheat into it with no experience. Got the most beautiful wheat stand you've ever seen currently. And there's no way a plow is ever going to hit that ground again. It's just not going to happen. Jump back to my little 7-acre triangle that no one can see. My experiment, because we didn't make any money last year, right? So I didn't have any money for cover crops. I had to cut it out. So I took that 7 acres of corn after we harvested it. It made in the mid-90s, good crop. I sprayed it with Roundup and LV6 after harvest, because remember, this was basically pasture ground that I turned into a field 3 years prior. So it had blue stem in it, and I got inundated with Johnson grass and Italian rye. So I sprayed it after harvest to take care of the Johnson grass and some sunflowers, but I let the volunteer corn grow. And when I let the volunteer corn grow, then a month prior to planting wheat, I came in and sprayed it with volunteer, which I'm pretty sure is clethodim. I got to double check that, but sprayed it with a product, volunteer, that's to kill the volunteer corn. I went and planted it a month later, and I got out, and I'm like, there is no way this wheat is coming up. Some of that volunteer corn had already fallen down. I got a mat of residue from the other corn that, from harvest. I got this corn that's thick as hair on a dog, volunteer. I'm trying to go through it. I've already sprayed it. Half of it's laying down. But there's a 1-month plant back deal on that volunteer, so I had to spray it prior to wheat. The wheat wouldn't grow if I'd have sprayed it after planting. Well, I didn't think it was possible, so I get out of the tractor and I wanted to look around, and I'm starting to look at the ground. How am I going to get this seed in the ground? My drill has like airbags for down pressure. I pump it up as high as you possibly can so I can get through this mat, right? So I pump it up, get all the down pressure I can get, but I go start looking at them volunteer plants, and I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to worms and stuff. You ask my 6-year-old son, he's like, what's daddy's favorite animal? Earthworm. I mean, that's just what I'm into. Well, I'm pulling these volunteer corn plants, and I'm just barely grabbing them, and they're just coming out of the ground. I mean, no strain at all. They come out. There's 3 to 7 earthworms, babies, in every single root ball of volunteer corn. Now, granted, this is BT corn, Roundup Ready volunteer corn, but the earthworms are still doing good. And now that has got a beautiful, perfect stand of wheat. So the challenge today is give these guys a chance. We've got to get some cover crops in the ground, and you have to see it for yourself, because that's the only way that I think we can make a change.